Hey Cicero fam, thanks for joining us for our Christmas program. Throughout the evening we're going to just tell some stories from our history and how we remember Christmas, and we'll invite you to think about your own stories later on. So I'm terrible at talking about my childhood because I have a terrible memory. I only remember things because I saw them in a picture once or in a home video. Like, they're not real memories, they're just things people told me happened. But there are a few things that stick out from my childhood. The 80s, which were awesome, by the way. Some of you guys missed that, and I think you're poorer for it. Because of G.I. Joe and Nintendo. It's hard to explain what Nintendo meant for us as kids. Oh my gosh, change the world. And Michael J. Fox and there's so much. But when I was 11, the greatest gift in the world was a BMX bicycle, and I got one. And it was red and black and super tough, and I rode it everywhere. Just loved that bike. Later that year, we moved from a small town to the suburbs of Atlanta, and I didn't realize there was a different culture there. And I left my bicycle outside, and it got stolen like the first night. So I had to learn the hard way that suburbs of Atlanta are not like small town USA in the South. And that year, so that was 1988, Dodgers won the World Series, Lakers won the NBA title again. But man, it was a tough year for my family. We were going through some really hard things. It was the beginning of the end for my parents' marriage. And I don't know if as a kid we really understood that, but I was 12. I mean, I knew something wasn't right. There was a lot of tension in our home. We didn't have anything. I mean, my parents were struggling to find decent jobs after the move, and we were just very poor at that time. And so at Christmas time, my friends are all getting Nintendos and G.I. Joes. The big battleship, the G.I. Joe battleship was like this. That was the sweet thing. And I don't remember getting gifts like that. I think my mom would have made sure we got something, but I think it was more practical stuff, like clothes, socks, and underwear. Yeah, the thing like every kid dreams of. And it just didn't feel like Christmas. In the past, before this, we weren't well off by any means, but there had been peace and joy in our home. But this year, it was the family tension and the poverty and all that working together, and being in a new school that was really large and uncomfortable for me in a lot of ways, that it just made that Christmas really difficult. And I was in a strange place in my faith. I had just gotten baptized the year before, and I think it was around that time that I read through the Bible for the first time, all the way through. And so I had this confidence that there was a God who loved me, but I was really confused by his apparent absence in my home. It just didn't seem like he was helping us out. He wasn't showing up the way that I thought he should show up. He wasn't doing what I thought he should do. And that raised a lot of questions for me. It led to some confusion that later on, when my parents did divorce, kind of came out as anger towards God and frustration at not being there, at least not in the way that I thought he should be. But hindsight does a lot for us, and it's so much easier for me to look back now and recognize that even though God wasn't showing up the way I thought he should, with the gifts that I wanted and the peace in my home that I wanted, he was absolutely there the whole time. The fact that we had food to eat and a house to live in was nothing short of miraculous. The fact that my family could all be in the same room together for Christmas was nothing short of miraculous. And all of that just, it's evidence to me that even though I couldn't see him where I wanted to see him, he was absolutely present the whole time. And man, that's just really given me a lot of comfort over the years to know that he doesn't have to show up the way I want him to, and he doesn't have to be everywhere I expect him to be. He's just always there. He made that promise, and he's never broken it yet. And that's really brought me a lot of comfort.
My Christmas story is the Christmas after my parents divorced. I was a senior in college, so I was on the other side of the country and very far from home. Because I was far from home, I missed a lot of the drama that happened around my parents' marriage falling apart, which was nice to a certain degree, but then by the time it all got to me, I just felt like everyone had moved on but me. And it was the most alone I've ever felt in my life. When I was growing up, my dad would always read Luke chapter 2 to us Christmas morning before we opened gifts. And as a kid, I hated it. It was the worst. All I wanted to do was open presents. I don't want to sit there and listen to the story that I had heard the most in my life. But I would always snuggle up between my parents and listen to my dad read that story to me. That Christmas, it was too painful to go home. So I was invited by my friend Dana to go spend Christmas with her and her family. And they were the best. I had been there several times and just treated me like family. And even though it was nice, it just wasn't the same. Nothing was the same. And I thought about that story that I hated listening to as a kid, and just sat in a guest room by myself, wanting nothing more than to hear my dad read me that story. So I called him and asked if he would read it to me over the phone. And he agreed and got his Bible and read it to me as I just laid in the bed with tears just streaming down my face. And I was so comforted by the story of our Savior's birth, and just knowing that God was truly with us and with me when I felt the loneliest. And it's still my favorite Christmas tradition. And now I get to test the patience of my children and reread the same story the same way, like I did when we were growing up.
One of my strongest memories when it comes to Christmas, growing up, well, we had a big family, and Christmas Eve we always gathered at my Grandma Gable's. And I mean, the house was really small, looked a lot like this, and grandkids everywhere. I had 7 aunts and uncles, and so, you know, just packed full, and always getting together, and it was so much fun. And then Christmas morning, it was just our family, my brother, sister, my mom and dad and I. And I remember very specifically the Christmas that I got, you know, Transformers, Dinobots, and, you know, always looking forward to the presents, and, you know, trying to guess. My brother and I especially would always try to guess, you know, do the shake thing. What is it? Try to remember what we put on our list, you know, a month ahead of time. And so Christmas felt like something, though, until I was about 8 or 9. Christmas was something that happened to me. It was something that we got to do, and it was fun. I went to go see my cousins, and then we went home, and Christmas morning, you know, we got to do the presents. And but something we always did as a family is we read, the first thing we would do Christmas morning at 7 o'clock, because Mom and Dad wouldn't let us get them up before 7 o'clock, is we would read from Luke 2. We would read the Christmas story together, but we always took turns. And I remember very specifically when I think it was 8. I could have been 9, but I think it was 8 years old, and it was first time that I got to read the Christmas story. And before that, it was always kind of like, get out, can you read faster, and kind of thing. But we always read from my dad's Bible, which was like almost looks exactly like this old NIV study Bible. And I remember that they let me know that, hey, Andy, it's going to be your turn this year. And I was like, all of a sudden I got nervous. I was like, I don't know how to pronounce, because I think I said like, Corininius, and that first few verses, you just butchering names. But when I actually started to read the Christmas story, I was 8 years old, and I had heard it, so many times already, but it dawned on me. And all of a sudden, for the first time, I was a part of Christmas. Christmas wasn't happening to me. It wasn't about the presents. It wasn't about my family and what they brought to me. And I was a part of it. In reading the story, it became so much bigger and intense. And I remember it was weird because the first 2 verses, you're just butchering it. But then it just there's this clarity of the story that happened for me, that it wasn't waiting for it to be done. And it was just this odd moment. And it was beautiful. When I look back on it, it was like, well, that was kind of weird and cool. But when you look back on it, all of a sudden you understand the significance of it. Because it was the first time, that Christmas, I think, was the first time I noticed really people enjoying other presents. It was the first time, what I got Mom and Dad, I actually paid attention to, the smile on their face. And it wasn't just, okay, there's yours. So for me, it was that powerful understanding and the clarity of the story, and that Christmas, why we give gifts, it's because of the gift that we receive. And it's Emmanuel, God with us. And He's with us as we're experiencing Christmas together.
So we're talking about stories of Christmas memories. And whenever I think of Christmas memories, the story that comes to mind is a Christmas Eve, like almost 20 years ago. I grew up in a small church in kind of the middle of nowhere. And this particular Christmas Eve, we decided we were going to do a Christmas Eve service. We didn't do it every year. But this year, we were doing it, and I was not excited. Like, to me, a Christmas Eve service meant I was like, there's 2 or 3 hours that I'm just going to be bored out of my mind. I'm going to have to dress up in the church clothes that I hated, because it was like dress slacks and these 4,000-pound clogs shoes that I hated, which I picked them out. I don't know why I picked shoes I hated so much. But we had to get dressed up. We went to church, and like we did every time we got together, we started with singing. And there was a person in front. They called out a page number, and then we'd turn to that page and we'd sing that song. But at the end of that singing section, there is an open invitation every time for specials. Does anybody have a special today? Is what they would say. And this woman stood up when they asked for specials, and it sticks out in my mind so much because this was her first Christmas without her husband. And she sang a song called "'Tis So Sweet to Trust in Jesus." And this was the first time, watching her sing this was the first time I ever remember knowing what people meant when they said that Jesus was enough for them. I grew up in church and Sunday school. I could say that, yeah, Jesus is all we need. I could recite that back. I knew that's what we were supposed to believe, but it made no sense to me until I saw this woman who, on a Christmas where depression seems like would be the normal response, she was still able to bring joy. And she didn't just sing it like there was no accompaniment. It was almost half spoken word, half singing it. But in that moment, this woman who I don't even know her name, I don't even know if she's still around. If she is, if you put her and I in a room together, she wouldn't know me, I wouldn't know her. But almost 20 years ago, she taught me that it's possible to have a relationship with Jesus that can sustain you through even the hardest of times. There's a line specifically that sticks out the most. And when she said it, she kind of stopped for a minute. She said, "I'm so glad I learned to trust him." And then watching her, I believed her. She wasn't just saying things. She was talking to and about Jesus in this moment. And here I am almost 20 years later, super grateful that she was able to teach me that lesson, that Jesus is all we need in this life. He can bring us to a point of joy even when it doesn't make sense.
So I don't think it's a secret that I am a bit of a Christmas freak. Most people wouldn't describe me as a giddy person the majority of the year, but when it comes to Christmas, something happens inside of me where I am like a little kid waiting to wake up on Christmas morning with a pile of presents and random stuff in my stockings, like too many things of chapstick and a bunch of socks that I'm never gonna wear. I just love Christmas. It's like the most magical time of year that I can think of. It's got all of my favorite things: my family, sugar cookies, Christmas music, Christmas trees. It's just magical. But as I've gotten older, I've started to sort of look back on some of my Christmases in the past and recognize them for what they were. And as magical and wonderful as Christmas is for me and my family, it's also been some of the hardest times our family has walked through. My family has experienced a lot of loss, and anybody who has lost somebody they love knows that Christmas is extra hard when you recognize empty seats at your kitchen table and it feels like every couple years there's another person who's not sitting there. So before my mom even got married, she lost her mom, and so for her, there's always been an empty seat at our table. And when I was really young, we lost my dad's dad, and I was too young to really understand the finality of losing somebody, but I wasn't too young to feel the heaviness in the room. And I have some really distinct memories of giving my grandma presents that would remind her of my grandpa, and she would open it and it was like she would sob, and I wouldn't understand why she was so upset until later when like it kept happening, and it was like this moment of intense grief but also immense joy at the fact that she was still with her family. Then a few years after that, my cousin Robert was killed in a car accident on his way home from from college right before Christmas break, 10 days before Christmas. And by that time, I was old enough to understand the long-term effect of losing somebody in your family. But it was another empty seat at our Christmas table, and that was a really heavy year for our family. And a few years later, we lost my dad's mom, and that was I remember knowing going into it that this was the last Christmas we were going to have with her. And instead of buying her a gift as a family, all of us kids got her something intentional that we picked out for her. And I remember watching her open these gifts and desperately wanting to press pause, just knowing this is a moment that I'm not going to get back. This is a Christmas that's in the past and I'm not going to have again. And every Christmas since then, all of those feelings come up at the same time. But the crazy thing about Christmas for my family is while there is an immense amount of pain and loss, there's also this magic every single time we get together. And so even though there's this pile of pain that's big enough for anybody to be super sad around the holidays, joy has always won. It's always been this theme of it's really hard, but I'm so grateful that as a follower of Jesus, I can see all of the times when it was hard, but but God was still there. And so this year, as we walk into Christmas of 2020, the longest year ever, and our first Christmas after losing my mom's dad and my last living grandparent, it would be really easy for me to say, like, this year is just kind of the worst, but I can look back on 26 years of Christmases and say, God was there through all of them, through all of the pain, and that is what Christmas means for me. It's like this, yes, it's never going to be the same, but there is something that never changes, and that's that Jesus is always here.
Throughout the program, you've heard each of us tell our stories about how we've experienced the presence of God in Christmas past, often in ways that were not obvious at the time and ways that we didn't expect. That's really what the message of Christmas is all about. God with us. When the angel told Joseph that this baby was coming, he said, his name will be called Emmanuel, which means God with us. That was God's mission. His objective was to be with his people. That's us. So you've also seen that we've each held a candle throughout our story, and the candle represents God's presence in our story. For the Jews throughout the centuries and even today, when they're preparing for their Sabbath celebration each week on Friday night, the first thing they do is light a candle, set it on the table in their home to represent the presence of God among them. And so we've used the same image, the candle representing the presence of God in our stories. And we've invited you to prepare a candle for your family, or one for each person, to represent the presence of God in your home and in your story. And so we would invite you to go ahead and light those candles now. And as we light these candles, we are going to remember how God was present in the lives of the individuals in the Christmas story. Think about Mary's story, an unplanned pregnancy. Probably everyone in town assumes that she cheated on her fiance, or that they just couldn't wait until they got married. And then she's told she's going to be the mother of the Son of God. It's going to be her responsibility to raise this child. There's a lot going on there, a lot of things that she would not have chosen for herself, a lot of things that she could be anxious about. But in the middle of all of that, God was present with her. And God's presence brought her hope that something good was coming. Think about Joseph's story. His fiancée is pregnant. He knows the child isn't his, but he's supposed to go ahead and marry her. Then they have to make a 60-mile journey on foot with her 9 months pregnant and spend the night in the barn. And he is also told he's going to be the earthly father of the Son of God, his responsibility. There's a lot going on for him. And in the middle of all of that, God was present with Joseph, and his presence brought Joseph peace. Even for the shepherds in the story, these guys have the worst job in the country. They're working the late shift. Not really a lot of prospects for them because they smell like sheep all the time. And then an angel jumps out of the dark at them and scares them half to death. And in the middle of their story, God is present, and his presence brings them joy. And I think it's easy for us to look back and see how God was present in our stories. And I encourage you to do that tonight. Tell some stories as you celebrate Christmas. And remember how God was with you in the middle of your stories. But we're also supposed to receive comfort that God is present with us now in ways that we can't always see, in ways that we don't really understand, and not always how we would choose to have it happen. But that's his promise, to be present with us in the midst of all of it. So, hope you have your candles lit, representing the presence of God in your home and in your story. And we're going to close the program singing Silent Night together. Would you sing with us?
Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright, round yon and mother and child. Holy infant, so tender and mild, sleep in heavenly peace. Sleep in heavenly peace.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry
Merry Christmas.